Thanks for coming into the Moline Public Library on a virtual program. We had hoped to present this program live with our friend Gretchen Small from the Butterworth Center in the Dear Wyman House in March, but just like a lot of other things that the pandemic changed, that was one of them. So we're glad that you've joined us this afternoon for her virtual presentation on Mattie Poole, who was a predominant Moline businesswoman before we really thought about successful businesswomen. People have often shared with Gretchen about the painted pottery, the porcelain pieces that they may have in their own family and the context that they share. And Gretchen's going to tell us a lot more about the woman, her business, and the pottery and the porcelain itself. So sit back, enjoy. Again, if you have questions, please type those in the chat room and I'll be sure to forward those to Gretchen and we'll entertain those at the end of today's presentation. Again, welcome to the Moline Public Library, Butterworth Center, Dear Wyman House.
Well, good afternoon. As Lisa mentioned, my name is Gretchen Small. I'm Director of Programs and Collections at Dear Wyman and Butterworth Center. I'd like to start off before I switch over, share my screen with the PowerPoint, talk about why I got interested in Mattie Poole. Way back over 30 years ago, when I first moved to this area, I stopped in an antique shop and was wandering around and I saw this dresser tray. And I thought it was so pretty and picked it up and noticed that on the back, it said M.W. Poole, but didn't think anything of it. A lot of China pieces have maybe a name or initials on the back. And so I went up to pay for it and the clerk said, "Oh, do you collect Mattie Poole?" Since I'd never heard of her before, I said, no, but she said, well, she had a China shop around this area and there's people that collect Poole. Well, of course, being a historian, that got me interested. And so I started doing some digging at the Rock Island County Historical Society to see what I could learn about Mattie Poole and the one piece that I owned. Since when I started putting this talk together a few years ago, I did kind of actively look for Poole pieces. I don't go out in search of them too much, but I found a few pieces and I'll show you those at the end. And then some of you may have Poole pieces. Hopefully you'll mention in the chat box what you have, or if you know somebody that has that. Several years ago, a couple years ago, I gave this program and there was an elderly lady that came to the program with her grandson. And she came up to tell me that she had a whole set of Poole china that her mother had made as a student at Mattie's shop. So I was thrilled to hear that, and I know there's lots more stories like that out there. So let's see if I can share my screen. And let's go up here so we can get rid of this. Okay, we're set. Now, in thinking about the most common occupations of women during the 19th century, you tend to think of domestics, seamstresses, laundresses, milliners, hat designers, boarding house owners, and farm women. Those are the first things that come to my mind. When we move into the 20th century, we expand our list to teachers, nurses, telephone operators, textile factory workers. That was very big in the early 1900s for women. Throughout American history, though, we also find cases of women entering into the male domain and becoming doctors and lawyers. But overall, society stressed the cult of true womanhood. where the job of women was to nurture her family and create a truly refined home. In the 1800s, it's rare to find a woman who created her own business. You're going to find them, but it's not real common. But even more unusual, I think, is a woman business owner who thrived on marketing her business to the fullest. And I think Mattie Poole is a good example. Now, the term china painting usually refers to the method of painting on white glazed porcelain objects. In England, china painting became fashionable with wealthy young women in the 1870s. This ties in with the rise of the arts and crafts movement and with the aesthetic movement. The aesthetic movement had a profound effect on America in the late 1800s and early 1900s. There was a renewed interest in decorative arts and all things handmade to adorn the home. The aesthetic movement offered women an opportunity to be taken more seriously as an artist. Now, in the US, china painting rose in popularity with the 1876 Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, with the display of painted porcelain in the women's pavilion. Then in later exhibitions, people were able to see the latest trends in design, and also about tools that would come in useful and ideas that they could take home. It also became acceptable for women to sell pieces of china. In 1897, Frances Willard suggested that hand-painted china of good quality could be a viable source of supplemental income for American women. So between 1870 and 1920, thousands of American women took up the art of china painting. Now, to understand a little bit about this before we get to Mattie Poole, let's talk about what a china painter does. They would outline a design with a special pencil on the glazed surface of a blank, like the ones you see here in this picture. Blanks were usually imported from the Limoges region of France. Some sources I've come across say that over 18,000 barrels of Limoges blanks were exported to the US during the mid to late 19th century. Then they would take the color powders, mix them with special oils to use for painting their design on the china that they had outlined. Now, there were other women making a name for themselves besides Mattie Poole. One was Susan Frackleton, who actually invented a kiln, and she wrote a book, The Tried by Fire, so that people could learn how to china paint. I think this picture, some of her pieces are just really fine art. Another one was Carolyn Harrison, wife of President Harrison. She was quite the china painter, and she would have friends come to the White House to paint china with her. Another one, Maria Longworth Nichols. She founded Rookwood Pottery, which many people collect today, in 1880. And she was inspired by the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. I found this picture online, which I enjoyed. Couldn't find anything else out about her, but out of Findlay, Ohio, we had Mrs. Lina Weaver's China painting class. 1890s, definitely, by the style of their dress. It's interesting that I've come across several China painters that were in Ohio. I think that was probably because their proximity to Philadelphia. It wasn't that big of a trip, so many of these ladies probably went to the exposition. Adelaide Robineau, her and her husband started a periodical for ceramic artists and potters. She also taught ceramics at Syracuse University at the end of her life. Another well-known pottery business was Pewabic, and that was started by Mary Chase Stratton. And then finally, I found some reference to a Lizzie Spicer in Akron, Ohio. Did not find really any pictures of her, but from what I read about her, she had a lot of similarities to Mattie Poole and really had a long-term business. And in some ways, I think has a similar style to some of the pieces that I've seen of Mattie Poole's. And notice that her blanks came from Limoges. And finally, Mattie Poole, who had her business in Moline for about 50 years. Now, Mattie Poole was born Mattie White in Grafton, Vermont in 1863. She graduated from the Vermont Academy, which is still in existence today. And so she must have come from a pretty wealthy family. And she also attended a nearby art school, which I haven't been able to find a name of. She then joined her sister in Salem, Dakota Territory, where she taught school. Sources say that Mattie met Staley Dane Poole, her future husband, during the period she lived in Dakota Territory. They married, lived in this house actually. It still stands here in Moline. But what I think is interesting about Staley is, first of all, I'm not real sure when they were married. There's conflicting dates. The first date that I have is January 17th, 1888, which is listed in Staley's obituary. But in Mattie's obituary, it states August 19th, 1893 as their marriage date. Now, I feel as the correct date is the 1888, Staley's obituary. He died first, so I feel that Mattie would have played a part in writing up his obituary, and women are usually better at remembering dates, so I think she got it right. Plus, in the 1892 Moline directory, it lists Staley as living in Moline, and we know that at about that time, they had a daughter named Emma May. Now, she died in 1894 at the age of 15 months. So you combine all those, they weren't married in August of 1893, they were married in January of 1888. We also know that Staley was quite a bit older than Mattie, and that he had 3 children from a previous marriage, which Mattie seems to have raised. He began working for the John Deere Plow Company of Indiana in 1888 as a traveling salesman. Now, I presume that this is when he passed through the Dakota Territory and met Mattie. Then about 1891, he came to Moline from Indianapolis, where he was placed in charge of the experimental department at Deere. He was basically an inventor for Deere and Company, traveled extensively all over the world, bringing back ideas for inventions that would be useful to farmers in other countries. His obituary states that he traveled to every state in the Union: Japan, Russia, Australia, the Philippines, Mexico, and Cuba. By 1895, he's listed as an assistant superintendent at Deere. Now, I'll get to in a little bit why I think it's important to tell you a little bit about Staley. But let's go back to the city directories and figure out, when did Mattie open her first shop in Moline? Resources I've read said that it was in the late 1890s that she opened her first shop. Looking at the directories from that period, she's not listed, but there is a Mrs. Edith B. Gaines listed as an artist and china painter in 1899 on 516.5 15th Street, downtown Moline. Now, some sources state, like this picture, that her first shop was in 1898 to 1900 at 620 15th Street. So I went to the city directories to see, okay, great, this will tell me where her first shop was. And in the city directory, it says that Swan Olsen, a good Swedish Moliner, had a merchant tailor shop at this location that's listed in this picture. So that doesn't make sense. So let's go back to that first picture and look at the age of Mattie in this picture, and then we'll back up and look right there, second from right is Mattie. She doesn't look that young anymore in this picture. So I feel that this picture shows her first shop. And it first shows up in the city directories in 1900. She's listed as an artist at number 17 McKinney block. The McKinney building was in the 400 block of 15th Street. The building's gone now. But when you look at some of these early pictures, especially that one you just saw a little bit ago, we can see that there's transom windows up above. And that tells me that it's a second floor, an upper floor office space in the McKinney block. So why did she begin the shop at this point in her marriage? She had lost a child in 1894, and no other children were born to the couple. I often wonder if Staley didn't play a major part in her becoming a businesswoman. As a married woman raising Staley's children, to then start her own business, she would have needed a husband that was encouraging and probably helped financially in the beginning. We also know that it's in 1902 that Staley went on a trip around the world. So he was probably gone for quite a while, a couple of years maybe. So how perfect is it for Staley to leave his wife with a successful business already, which would keep her busy, but also help support the family while he was gone? So let's go through where we know some of her shops were located in that 50-year career. As I mentioned, the McKinney block is probably where she went in the 1890s. not that earlier picture that we saw. So but we definitely know that she's there in 1900 to about at least 1902. Look at this picture. Very typical of her shops. They were jam-packed with china. She used to claim, a niece of hers recorded that Mattie said, you know, if you walk through, visualize the women in their long dresses. If you knock something over, you were going to pay for it. So maybe she did this for a reason. I don't know. We know at some point she moved to 15th Street, likely the 620 15th Street address. And this, again, it says 1898. You can barely see it up here. And 620 15th Street. I think that was definitely, that's Mattie in the doorway. She's not a young married woman anymore. But we know that she was here for several years. She had the china painting, art studio. We can see from this great picture that she's got artwork, framed artwork that you could buy. This picture has always puzzled me. To me, it looks like that 15th Ave Street location, but you can see the reflection of the camera taker here in the picture. And her dress, from what I can see, is pure 1890s. So there's a little bit of a puzzlement to me, but I still think she started off in the McKinney block upstairs. Here's another picture of that 15th Street address. That's Staley in the middle there with probably the different, Mattie hired various girls to paint. You could not only take classes, but you could also go in and buy finished china pieces. And so she had quite a crew painting for her. I've also heard the story that Staley was quite a dashing, dapper gentleman. And I think this kind of shows that in this picture. The other thing I like about this picture is you really see the style of their dresses, which is pure early 1900s. So that coincides with the 15th Street address. So here we are back to that first picture. Forget about that 1898 to 1900. Mattie was in this store in the early 1900s. Next, she's listed in 1906 as having her studio upstairs at 1514 Fifth Avenue. And it says that she receives pupils to take china painting classes. In 1907, it says that she owns property at 1514 Fifth Avenue. But this could well be, again, ignore the date up at the top, 1898 to 1900. This isn't the first shop. This is either the 15th Street shop inside or when she's moved to that Fifth Avenue location. What I like about this picture is that you can see the framed artwork that you could buy, the finished china, and you see a variety of blanks. Those are the fired porcelain pieces that you purchased and then did your own design and artwork on for the class. But again, a crammed full shop. Few more pictures of that 620 address on 15th Street that I like so much. Again, she was already getting into the marketing of window displays which I think were a big part of her business. Now, in 1912, Staley and Mattie build their own building on 1526 Fifth Avenue in downtown Moline. Still stands today. Clear up here, it still says Poole Building. But here's an early picture taken from the Henry W. Horst Company publication. Henry W. Horst was a contractor and he built the building for her. We know that the building cost $20,000 to build, and that Mattie paid for it out of profits from her business. She had the store on the main floor, a kiln in the basement, and then upstairs she had 2 apartments. One that she and Staley lived in, his children were grown, and the other they rented out. Again, she was always thinking of how to make a little extra money. And most of the staff that she used consisted of former pupils. And here we are on the inside of that store when it's on the main floor. Again, a nice packed piece. This area right here is what looks the most fragile to me. It's sitting on top of a large piece of glass on top of these porcelain supports. What's also interesting about getting into Mattie's idea of astute marketing is that we found a copy of this letter at the Historical Society where she wrote good words about Henry W. Horst, kind of a letter of recommendation, and telling him that they were satisfactory with his work and definitely you should use him in the future. Now, what I think's interesting is she included a picture of her building on her stationery. She had, of course, her logo, all the things that she had, and really stressed a very professional looking letterhead. Now you do notice it said Mrs. S.D. Poole. Now I think of her as Mattie Poole in her china shop. At that time, that probably wouldn't have been a plus for her to say Mattie Poole. Now you do find other china makers who are listed as Miss, like Lizzie Spicer from Ohio. But she was married, and that was important to include. I also think it's interesting that he signed and she signed the letter. That was important to have his name on the letter of recommendation too. So we go back to the shop. We know that Mattie was quite the entrepreneur, looking for ways that she could market her business to the fullest. And she did that in a variety of ways, by promoting her classes. This is an old photocopy. This is Mattie right here, but then luckily they did list some of the other people in the class. She had Carrie Samuel, who was her head girl. And we know that china painters, you signed your work. And so this is the signature that you'll find on the pieces that came out of the Poole shop that were produced under Mattie Poole. Now, this does not mean that Mattie Poole did the china painting on every piece. She had those girls working for her, painting china that she could sell, and you would have signed Mattie Poole's signature on the back. I've seen M.W. Poole. I've heard that there, I don't own any, but there's some that say S.D. Poole on them. So even her husband's signature's on the china. So it's hard to say if she actually hand painted any of the ones I have, but we do know that she did, and then she had others. Now, if you took a class from her and painted a piece, you wouldn't sign M.W. Poole on the back. You would sign your own name. So here we've got another M.W. Poole, little different style of writing. Now, how did she market herself? Well, of course, in the city directory, she would buy an ad. She didn't just buy an ad like this. That was standard. That's what came with the city directory. Instead, she would put out extra money to do a larger ad. So we can see here the Fifth Avenue store. Most of these, I think, are all the Fifth Avenue. Oh, the top one here is from the McKinney block. She also took out ads in the newspaper, and it wasn't just an ad like her city directory ad. No, she had a twist to it, trying to get you thinking about what could I buy and how would I use it? Oh, perfect graduation gift, and wedding presents. She also, we found this copy of a business card. She had business cards. Here you notice it's the, before she built her building. She had this, she was already on her new phone number. So she had a phone, but a very good description of what she offers. But I thought it was kind of interesting that it looks to me like she used an older picture of herself for the business card, where she looks a little bit younger. As I mentioned earlier, she liked the idea of window displays, and this is a really poor copy, but I like it because she listed it as an exhibit of hand-painted china by Mrs. S.D. Poole. The other little thing I like, she had Chautauqua tickets for sale in her store too. We found this at the Historical Society, where back in 1909, she would hand out these in the month of May, that if you bring in a new member, a new pupil, you would get one free 50-cent lesson. The catch was that the new member had to take at least 3 classes, so $1.50. So she used all types of ways to market her business, and was very successful building her own building. But sadly, in 1930, Staley died. Mattie continued to operate her store on Fifth Avenue until her death in 1948. Towards the end of her life, she moved her china shop upstairs and rented out the downstairs. She didn't employ girls to paint china anymore, and she just did her own painting and had classes. But she got to thinking, what else can I sell that would make a little money? And she thought, okay, I've got young women coming in to take china painting classes, and they probably have children at home. So what could I carry that they might buy to take home to their children? Well, she had a spare bathtub in the back, and she put water in it and had guppies and goldfish in it that she could sell. Just hilarious. I think, what a mind. She was always thinking. We know that in the very end of her life, she employed a woman named Grace. I've never found out what Grace's last name was, but Grace was a secretary and business manager for Mattie. And towards the very end, she pretty much ran the business and was also the executrix of Mattie's estate. Now, besides being a successful businesswoman for almost 50 years, Mattie was also very active in the community. She was a charter member of the Moline's Women's Club. She was active in King's Daughters and Daughters of the American Revolution. She liked to write essays that she shared with the home study group of the King's Daughters. And she was a member of the Whatsoever Circle of King's Daughters. That's a group of King's Daughters that I don't think exists anymore. I've never seen them meet at Butterworth Center. We know that she taught Sunday school for many years at First Baptist Church in Moline. There she is with her class of boys. We also know that Mattie loved to fish, and she was very close to two nieces that she lived near. Now, we know that I found a reference in 1971, long after her death, that some pieces of her pottery were exhibited at a national China painting exhibit that was held at the old River Center in Davenport. I've never been able to find out any other information about this exhibition. But at this point, special thank you to the Rock Island County Historical Society and some of their volunteers. If you later want to contact me, if you've got a piece that you want to tell me about, I'd love to hear from you. But let me stop share and come back to the screen and show you a couple pieces that I own. One is, I don't know if you can see that, it says M.W. Poole. This is that dresser tray that I first bought over 30 years ago. I just really enjoyed it. It does say France on the back on the stamp, so I know the blank came from France. And that was the only piece that I owned for many, many years. And then I went to an estate sale, and I was looking for a sewing machine that I knew had been a gift to a staff member from Mrs. Butterworth. I ended up buying the sewing machine, but as I was walking around, I saw this, it's like almost like a bowl, and thought, oh, that's really a nice example of China. There's it's not in perfect condition, but it had M.W. Poole on the back. But this, the stamp says it was Severa from Bavaria. So the blank came from Germany instead of France. Then I was in a couple of shops over in Rock Island, and I saw this little plate, and the colors and design didn't appeal to me that much, but I happened to look at the back and it says M.W. Poole, different handwriting again. The blank, it says Nippon. So as time went on, she probably was using less blanks from France because it was maybe cheaper to go this route. And as I walked around the store, I saw a second plate that was kind of similar. This one's cherries, this one's strawberries. And so out of curiosity, I picked it up and it says M.W. Poole on the back. So I have both of those. One piece that I forgot to bring with me today, I have a very small piece. It's this shape, but it's only about this big. It's a little ring dish that I happened to pick up because I thought it was pretty. And I looked at the back and it said M.W. Poole on it. So they're definitely out there. If you, a couple years ago, I had a person at a program who said that there was an antique shop out in LeClaire at that time that had a whole set of Poole china and that they were asking $1,200 for it. I doubt if they got that. Nobody wants a whole set of china anymore, sadly. But at this time, if you've got any questions, Lisa's going to kind of feed me some questions. Or if anybody's got, I don't see anything yet, somebody needs to ask me a question about Mattie Poole. Oh, Carol is busy typing, I can tell.
While we wait on Carol, I will lead off. You had told us to pay attention to the deer connection to Staley. Were you going to say some more about that?
Oh, what I meant was that early on, I gave you a description of Staley's career and how much he traveled and his background, because I was linking that to that he was so supportive of his wife being a businesswoman. So that's what I meant by that. Good question.
Have you ever tried just eBay or Google?
Have I tried eBay or Google? No, I don't think I have. I don't remember ever doing a search for Mattie Poole. I think because I don't want to collect masses of Poole, except for those two saucers. I tend to look for pieces that are signed by her that I really like, so that I don't go overboard. Because I have some other, so I have a whole stack of saucers at home, some of which belong to my husband's side of the family, some that belong to my side of the family that I like. And then I've picked up a few walking through antique shops. There's one very similar in size and style as this one. And when I turned it over, it was a woman's name and she had written Indianapolis on it. So she had gone to a china shop in Indianapolis long ago, and I found it here in the Quad Cities, and since I grew up in Indiana, I had to buy it.
Our friend, Gretchen and my friend, Neil Dahlstrom has said it sounds like Mattie, was managing the house and the business while Staley was out traveling the world. He must have been gone for long periods of time.
I don't know if you heard, Lisa, the question was, Neil Dahlstrom mentioned that here was Mattie managing a household, a business, thriving business, and here was Staley out traveling the world, having a gay old time, I assume. Yeah, I think that's probably true. I've never asked Neil about what he knows about Staley, but I'm sure there's some things in his records out at Deere and Company on Staley. Yeah.
And then Janet says, and I like this store, I haven't been in there for quite a while. Are there any pieces, do you know, at Patterns of the Past in Princeton, Illinois?
It's been a while since I've been out to that shop in Princeton. It's possible. The problem is that you've got to look at the back of every piece of china if you're going to find a pool, because these designs were used by china shops all over the country. You could buy patterns. Yes, you could also design your own. And I think Mattie did do some of that, but you also purchased patterns that people could then use to mark onto the blank with. And so you aren't going to go to a China or antique shop and see the front and go, ooh, that's a pool. You got to turn it over and look at the back to see if it says MW Pool. I would love to find one that says SD Pool on the back. I don't know, all of mine say MW Pool. I don't know if the one says SD Pool, if that makes it a higher probability that she painted it because she called her business Mrs. SD Poole. Who knows? If only we could ask her.
Well, I have another question, Gretchen. I'm sitting here listening. You're talking about a deer connection in the pools, and I'm hearing that Mattie was in some of the same things we know Mrs. Butterworth was active in. Do you have any sense that they knew each other, and are there any pieces today at the home?
I have never found any pieces in Butterworth Center or Deer Wyman House that are marked as Poole. Whether or not Mrs. Butterworth or Mrs. Deer, Mrs. Charles Deer, or Catherine, of course, was her youngest daughter, or Anna, her oldest daughter. Did they ever do any china painting? Who knows? Because that would have been an acceptable outlet for your artistic ability. We know that Mary Deer painted. We know that she knitted. So she had an artistic flair. I've never found anything of Catherine or Anna's that tell me that they were artistic, but that's something that every young Victorian girl was trained in, is in the finer arts, making your home a better environment to raise your children. So I don't know. I know that Mrs. Butterworth was not a member of the Whatsoever Circle. They could have known each other through DAR. That's a definite link there, because Mary Deer and Catherine Butterworth were very active in the DAR. And if Mattie was, they definitely crossed paths. I hadn't thought of that, but they definitely would have crossed paths. Does anybody online own any Poole pieces? I can see a few heads shaking.
Or if you do, type in the chat.
Yeah, or if you want, just type it into the chat. Whenever, it's been a while since I've given this talk, and whenever I do, I get the itch to start going through antique shops again, looking for some Poole pieces. Not that I need to buy anything else, but I really don't have any space left in my china cabinets. But like I said, I try to be selective with the Poole and only pick out pieces that appeal to me. If there aren't any more questions, I encourage you to check out our website, butterworthcenter.com. We have a lot of new features about the history of the family, some kids' activities on the website, family tree, and my new interest is I finally, during the quarantine, decided I'm gonna start a blog. And so it's on the website. You can subscribe to it so then you get notices, at least that's the way I read it, when a new post comes up. I've got 3 up so far. I've just started. I do about 1 a month. And the first 3 have all centered around William Wyman, who was the son-in-law of Charles Deere. He married Anna Deere Wyman. And he has always interested me, like Mattie Poole. And so I kind of broke his life up into 3 segments and did 3 posts because there was so much cool stuff about him. So I spread it out over 3. Also, keep coming back to our website. Fairly soon, we'll be getting up information on 2 programs we have coming up in October. Both are related to the suffrage movement and the anniversary. October 4th will be Elizabeth Cady Stanton online, sadly. And then October 22nd, we have someone coming in who portrays Alice Paul, both 2 important figures during the suffrage movement. And then we're underway getting plans done for our Christmas event. We love doing 19th century Christmas on that first Sunday in December. That's not going to happen this year. We just can't have the capacity to do that. You know, we have hundreds of people coming through the house. So we're working up something a little different. I'm not going to give it away yet because we aren't quite all there, but we've got something pretty cool planned with timed entry into one of the houses. So check back when we get that updated. If you're not on my mailing list, send me an email and I'll add you to my email list or the hard copy list. But again, if you come across anything else that you want to share with me about Mattie Poole, I have a feeling that Neil will be going and doing some digging on Staley. I see here that he didn't know Mr. Poole's first name. So it was Staley Dane, D-A-N-E, Staley Dane Poole. So.
And Gretchen, if I can answer one more question online. Lori says that her internet connection went down a couple of times, and will a recording of this be available? And no, it was not recorded today. We were having tech issues here on our end, so we're just glad that it came into being.
And I meant to hit record, but like I said, we had some difficulties and I was biting my nails, hoping I'd be live by 2 o'clock. And we had to go in the back door to get it up and going, which means I couldn't hit record and I didn't think to tell somebody. So again, thanks for coming today. Lisa, do you have any final words?
We have a couple of announcements. Gretchen was talking about her blog. We have a blog for adults here at the Moline Library, and every Thursday we feature a historic note from the Dispatch and the prior papers put together by my colleague Bob Conklin. So look for that little gem. We also have the historic papers digitized and available on our website, along with the Moline High School yearbooks. So take a look at those remotely from your home. We will welcome Gretchen back prior to that tease she just gave you for Victorian Christmas. The week before, we will have her virtually speaking on Victorian Christmas traditions. So look for that probably in our late October, early November email. If you have any interest in any other local history programs, either with Gretchen or with other folks in the community, please reach out to me. That's something we think we can still do virtually during this time of pandemic that's not just adding to everything else out there, because we know that it's hyper local and we think it's really important that we continue to tell the stories of the Quad citizens who came before us, because it just adds such a rich element. We're very grateful you all attended today. So thank you for your presence and your attention to detail.